UFC President Dana White went live earlier tonight and announced a slew of massive breaking news fight announcements. UFC London has a new main event, which is Leon Edwards versus Sean Brady, 5-round main event. Jack Della Maddalena was originally scheduled to fight Leon Edwards. He is now out of that fight. In comes Sean Brady. Then we have UFC 314. There's a bunch of fights that have been announced for UFC 314. We're going to go through all of them. We'll get to the entire main card essentially later in the video. But the main event, Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes for the undisputed featherweight title. Ilia Topuria has vacated his featherweight title. I believe Dana is kind of pissed at Ilia Topuria. We'll get to that later in the video when I take my victory lap as well for calling all of this. Co-main event of UFC 314, which goes down in April in Miami, is Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett, which is just hilarious. I actually really love that fight. And there's some other fights on 314. We'll get to that when we talk about the main cards. It's a great card. Then you have UFC 315 in May. Main event is Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena for the welterweight title. Co-main event is Valentina Shevchenko versus Manon Fiorot for the women's flyweight title. So a lot to digest, and we also have a mega fight in the making that has yet to be announced, and I think there's some nuances to what's really going on behind the scenes, which I will break down towards the end of this video. So let's jump right into it. UFC London. We have Leon Edwards versus Sean Brady as your new main event. Obviously, Jack Della Maddalena was pulled from this fight to fight Belal Muhammad at UFC 315, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I'm going to get into my thoughts on each fight, give you an early prediction for each fight. By the way, guys, if you enjoyed these videos, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, like the video. I greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate all the support recently, guys. With all this news, I figured, you know what, I have to make a video discussing all this. And there's some fights I haven't even talked about yet that are massive news as well. I wasn't going to name them all right off the jump. It's like 10 fights. So, Leon Edwards versus Sean Brady. You know, I like this fight quite a bit. I think it makes a lot of sense. You look at the UFC rankings right now. I don't have the welterweight rankings on the screen. Leon Edwards is number 1. Sean Brady's number 5. I think it, you know, obviously the rankings don't mean everything. But right now, I think it makes a decent amount of sense. But I'm going to be honest with you. This may be the end of Leon Edwards. Sean Brady is a very, very good grappler. Leon Edwards, I mean, I think a lot of people overrated his takedown defense because he was able to stuff some takedowns against Kamaru Usman in a rematch where he was grabbing the fence, and then he fought a washed bum in Colby Covington who had Dana White privilege. And so they started overrating his takedown defense, and then we saw what Belal Muhammad was able to do to him. He picked him up, dumped him on his bald spot, dominated him throughout the fight, took his welterweight title from him. I'm going to be honest, Leon Edwards is getting the shaft in this fight because JDM was a much more favorable matchup for Leon Edwards. I'm not saying that he would definitely win that fight, but now he's fighting Sean Brady, who has excellent jiu-jitsu, excellent grappling. I believe if I'm not mistaken, you know what? Let me open another tab real quick. Didn't he go 5 rounds with Gilbert Burns? I don't believe he finished Gilbert, right? No. Okay, yeah, it was 5 rounds. He went 5 rounds with Gilbert Burns. Sorry, my brain is a little bit fried. Went 5 rounds with Gilbert Burns. Has cardio. Leon fades, man. If he doesn't get to dictate the pace, he fades. So, to be honest, I think this is going to be kind of the end of Leon Edwards. I think this is the worst possible matchup for him right now, outside of obviously Belal, who dominated him. But on top of that, it's on a month's notice. He was training for JDM, who has no grappling, who I would favor Leon Edwards to out-grapple. And now he's fighting Sean Brady, who has excellent jiu-jitsu, is big for the weight class. He has shit striking, but I believe he'll probably be able to take Leon Edwards down, control him, beat him up, and probably win the fight. I'm going to pick Sean Brady in that fight, probably via decision, but I could actually see him subbing Leon Edwards because he does have a jiu-jitsu and submission threat. So I'm going to pick Sean Brady in that fight. UFC London, there's no other fights that they just announced. These are all kind of fights we already knew. Jan Blachowicz, Carlos Ulberg, Molly McCann versus Estela Nunes. Ew, we'll just end right there. Then we're going to jump over to 314. 314, we're just going to go in chronological order. I don't know what other order to go in right now. Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. Now, if you've been watching my channel, I told you guys this fight was going to happen. I thought it would be for an interim title. I did not think it would be for the undisputed title. Apparently, according to Dana White, Ilia Topuria can no longer make weight. I think that's a bit of an excuse. I think there's probably some tensions going on. I'm going to be honest, though. I know a lot of people are kind of hyping up this fight. They're like, yeah, man, Volk versus Lopez. Yeah, hell yeah, brother. And I don't want to sit here and be a Debbie Downer. I want to be happy. I want to be excited. I was really hoping for some big, crazy, great fight announcements tonight where the UFC finally gets it right. Maybe this was the only choice they had. Lopez does not deserve a title fight. And before you say, I already have it down here, 5-fight win streak. His last one was Brian Ortega, who didn't even deserve to be ranked that high. And then you have Movsar Evloev, who was 19-0. And his last win was against Aljamain Sterling, which I believe is a much better win than Brian Ortega. Okay? And he also has a win over Diego Lopez where he dominated him. I know a lot of people like to give Diego Lopez a participation trophy for that. But it should have been, if it's not going to be Topuria in any fight, which I believe they did try to make Topuria Volk too, but we'll talk about that in a second. It should have been Volk versus Evloev for an undisputed title, but because Lopez kind of has that Brazilian-Mexican popularity, trains in Mexico, I believe, he's actually Brazilian, and he's a fan favorite, we're giving him a participation trophy in the first Evloev fight, and now we're giving him an undisputed title fight. Completely undeserved. If Movsar wasn't there, okay, have at it. There's really no one else. Featherweight's kind of dead now, okay? But if you're going to have Movsar there, you have to give him the title fight, man. And I don't want to hear anyone say, oh, well, Movsar's boring, man. His fight against Aljo was an amazing fight. If you didn't like it, you're essentially a little bitch who doesn't enjoy actual MMA. You just want to see, oh, man, just stand and bang, bro. And then on top of that, the fight before that against Arnold Allen that Dana White crapped on, because for some reason Dana White crapped on it, people act like that was a bad fight. That's revisionist history. That was arguably the best fight on that pay-per-view main card. But anyway, let's talk about the actual fight. Old man Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez, main event of UFC 314. Exactly what I predicted. I did not anticipate it to be for the undisputed title. I don't really know who to favor in this fight. I'm going to be honest. Because Volk had his chin taken twice in a row. Lopez does have good power. It depends how much Volk is diminished. Has the time off, kind of help rejuvenate him and recover his chin a bit? He's going to be out for about 14 months by the time he fights Diego Lopez. I don't think Lopez can submit him. If Brian Ortega didn't get him in that guillotine, when Ortega was even better and snatched it up and had a mounted guillotine, I don't think Lopez can sub him. Lopez doesn't have great cardio. He almost lost to a short notice Dan Ige, but all that was thrown together on short notice, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. Look, I may switch my pick on this one. If Volk's not completely washed, Volkanovski wins this fight. I do believe Volkanovski wins this fight. I just think he's better everywhere. Lopez isn't taking him down. Volk is pretty defensively responsible. Lopez doesn't have anywhere close to the level of technical striking ability that someone like Islam Makhachev or Ilia Topuria have. So it's basically Lopez has a puncher's chance in the first round, or maybe Volk's just completely washed. 14 months off, back-to-back KOs. I understand the narrative. Maybe he gets clipped on the chin and put to sleep. But I'm going to go Volk in this one. And I'm ultimately shocked that Ilia Topuria has vacated the belt. But I think there's more to that story, but we're going to get to that at the end of the video because there's a mega fight potentially on the horizon with Ilia Topuria that I told you guys about a couple weeks ago before there was any rumors, okay? I know everyone's talking about it now, but before there was any real rumors about it, I covered it weeks ago. Anyway, rest of UFC 314. Co-main event, Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett. That's... I haven't laughed in a bit. I got to laugh at this. Remember when I said I know someone's going to be pissed that I'm doing this. Remember when I said that Michael Chandler would never fight Conor McGregor? And people said to me, Joey, you're just saying that because you don't like Michael Chandler. It had nothing to do with whether or not I liked Michael Chandler. It had to do with me looking at the circumstances, taking in all the information, and giving you guys my best educated guess. Since early 2023, I'm losing track of the year now. Anyway, Chandler sat out for damn near 2 years, finally came back, got destroyed and dominated by Charles Oliveira. The only moments he had in that fight was where he blatantly cheated multiple times. And now he's finally fighting down in the rankings against Paddy Pimblett. Let me actually look at the rankings real quick, because Chandler's been squatting on the rankings. His last win is against old man Tony Ferguson. How insane is that? And he's still somehow number 7. And you have Paddy Pimblett sitting at number 12. So I'm happy to see having Michael Chandler fight down in the rankings. Listen, guys, I know this is probably going to be a bit of a hot take, because I know Paddy's not considered to be all that great. And, okay, he beat Bobby Green, but what does that really mean? I'm picking Paddy over Chandler. Chandler is, first off, he's old. Second off, he couldn't stuff a takedown from Charles Oliveira to save his life. Somehow he has this American wrestling. And this is one of the dumbest narratives in the sport is, if Michael Chandler just fought smart, he would win. If Michael Chandler just fought smart, he would win. The only reason Chandler has ever been successful is because of his brute strength and athleticism and power. If he does not fight like that, he does not have the ability to win. And against a fresh, young guy who doesn't have a lot of miles on him in Paddy Pimblett, I think he probably loses. I could see him getting submitted. I could see him getting KO'd. I could see Paddy getting KO'd. I really could see that. Paddy leaves his chin out there. Has gotten, hurt against super low-level guys. I haven't been super high on Paddy. I picked him against Bobby Green. But, I haven't been... I thought he lost to Jarrett Gordon. But Michael Chandler, I'm just not picking him in a fight. I think he's mentally broken. I think he's a weak, pathetic man who kind of made a bunch of excuses after getting dominated by Charles Oliveira. And I just think he's too busy thinking about sniffing Conor McGregor's jockstrap to actually go out there and win a fight. I just don't believe this man wins a fight. So I'm going to go Paddy Pimblett in that matchup. I do love the fight. I do love that the UFC made this a 5-round co-main event. It deserved to be 5 rounds. Could Paddy gas? His cardio looked like shit against Jarrett Gordon, so he could gas. But Chandler, he's going to go all out in the first round unless he gets a stoppage. He's probably going to be exhausted too. Look at the way Dustin Poirier submitted him in the 3rd round. Paddy Pimblett has really good jiu-jitsu and submission ability. That's his best strength. That's his biggest strength. So Paddy's much younger, less miles on him, hasn't taken a lot of damage. I think Paddy Pimblett probably gets it done over Michael Chandler, but I just think it's hilarious. Joey, you don't like Chandler. That's why you're saying he's not going to fight Conor ever. Now we're like 3 years later. I know that people are going to be like, oh, Joey, everyone knew that wasn't going to happen. If you've been watching the channel, you know that wasn't always the case. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But thank God Chandler is finally in his late 30s decided to stop waiting on Conor McGregor. I think it's good that he's fighting Paddy. And we need to get Chandler out of the rankings, okay? We need to get him out of the rankings. Paddy is probably going to oblige us and get him out of the rankings. I'm going to pick Paddy by finish. I don't know if he's going to sub him. I don't know if he's going to KO him. But I think Paddy, I think he gets it done against Michael Chandler. I will not pick Michael Chandler in any fight until he actually wins the fight. Michael Chandler is like a, Muscle Milk Mike is like basically the middle of like the Tony Ferguson slide right now, in my opinion, after wasting 2 years of his career on another man. Now, also, Dana White announced, we already knew about Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes. By the way, this is a great card. He also announced Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. Now, I don't want to shit on this fight, but Yair, he really didn't look great in his last fight against Brian Ortega. He hasn't been super active. He lost to Alexander Volkanovski before that. So he fought once in 2024. He fought twice in 2023. It's not horrible. Didn't look great against Brian Ortega. Looked decent in the first round, then just looked pathetic and weak. And then you have Patricio Pitbull, right? I've been watching Bellator for a long time. I watched Patricio in Bellator. I'm happy to finally see him come to the UFC. But one thing you got to highlight here, he's 37 years old. And look, I don't want to sit here and shit on fans too much. But look, he's coming off a win over Jeremy Kennedy. Say what you will about that. Okay, it's decent. Before that, lost 2 fights. Okay, against Sergio Pettis and I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name, Suzuki. Okay, now let me break this down for you because this seems to happen quite a bit and it really drives me nuts. And, considering a lot of MMA fans watch this channel, I don't want to just sit here and shit on MMA fans. But one thing that drives me nuts is when you have decent talent outside the UFC, None of the like UFC loyal seems to care about him too much. Then the second they come to the UFC, it's like the fans are just eating up the Dana White and UFC propaganda and media promotional machine. And then all of a sudden, sometimes rightfully so, a fighter from outside the UFC comes to the UFC, and all of a sudden the fans are like, oh man, can't wait, blah, 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 blah. Oh, they're so good, blah, blah, blah. They're going to be a champion, blah, 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 blah. Pitbull's a former champion, okay? In other organizations. He's too damn old. He's too damn old. Now, he does have grappling, so he could beat Yair. But it's just, he came to the UFC a little bit too late, man. He just really did. And, like, even if you look back, you know, throughout his career, got finished here by AJ McKee. AJ McKee, I know he got the win back. I'm trying to remember. I thought he might have lost that fight, if I remember correctly. I can't remember for sure. You go back to here, lost to Benson Henderson, lost to Daniel Strauss. He's a guy that has an illustrious career, as Michael Chandler would say. But 36-7. Doesn't he have a KO against Michael Chandler, if I'm not mistaken? Yeah. He did KO Michael Chandler a while ago, but that's back in 2019. He's lost 2 out of his last 3. I like the matchup. I like the matchmaking. I think Yair, if any top guy that he can beat right now outside of Brian Ortega, who I believe is moving up to lightweight, if he can beat anyone, it'll probably be Yair mixing in the grappling, because Yair's grappling or his takedown defense is kind of shitty, as decent submission game. But yeah, I think it's a decent fight. I think it's the right matchmaking. I'm excited for it. I think it will be a banger. I think overall we have a bunch of quality fights on this card. I just think it's a little bit too late for Patricio Pitbull, even though I know kind of the media machine and the propaganda machine is going to get behind him. And I have no problem with that. Like, I like to see Pitbull get some shine after all these years. But yeah, I just don't know if he's going to be one of those guys. Oh, let's see him in a title fight soon. And we're going to talk about 45 here in a second when we go back to the main event. But one other fight I want to talk about that was recently announced, I believe it was announced today. I don't know if Dana actually announced it in his announcement or not. But we have Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates. Absolutely love this fight. Straight up banger. Jeff Neal, very underrated. Great fighter, great striking, good takedown defense. Prates has looked incredible, but doesn't have that staple win yet. He beat Neil Magny, okay? What does that really mean? We have to really see how good Carlos Prates is. Love that matchup. I think the main card, that'll all be main card. So you have Jeff Neal, Carlos, they'll probably rearrange it a little bit. But you have Jeff Neal, Carlos Prates, Yair Rodriguez, Patricio Pitbull, Nikita Krylov, Dominic Reyes. That might even open up the card. They might rearrange that around. Chandler, Paddy Pimblett, Alexander Volkanovski, Diego Lopes. So love the card. UFC 314 is pretty good. You know, but I don't know if it's like the UFC kind of like putting out some like subpar cards and pay-per-views recently, because to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the main event. Featherweight's kind of dead now without Topuria. Topuria KO'd Volkanovski, KO'd Max, and now left the division and vacated his title, which that's the last thing we're going to talk about. But I just think like, okay, if Volkanovski wins, I don't want to say he's an illegitimate champion. I just bit my tongue as I said that. I don't think but it's like, it's going to be one of those things where Topuria is kind of, hanging his head over the division. And I do believe that the UFC wanted to make Ilia versus Volk too. And I do believe there is some tension there because that was not made. And I do believe that's why Ilia ultimately vacated the belt. But we'll talk about that again towards the end of the video. But 145 does feel a bit dead now with this happening at the top of the division. Oh, Diego Lopes gets a title shot off a win over Brian Ortega, and Volkanovski, coming off back-to-back losses, is getting a title shot. Now, I will say this. I really had no interest in Topuria Volk too. I don't think anyone did. So even though I'm complaining a bit, I'm not saying there was a amazing other option. I would have preferred to see Volkanovski Mavsar for the undisputed title, or even Lopez Mavsar 2 for the title. But I do believe Mavsar deserved it more than Lopez, and I do understand Volkanovski getting that rematch for the undisputed title, considering he hasn't lost at featherweight up until he got KO'd by Ilia Topuria. But we'll circle back to that later in the video. So let's move on to UFC 315. UFC 315. By the way, you know what I just realized? Did I give picks for these fights? I did for the main. I said I'm probably picking Volkanovski. I picked Paddy Pimblett. I don't know who I'm picking in Yair versus Patricio. Right now, I'm going to lean Yair just because he's younger. But I could see Pitbull working in the grappling and winning that fight. So I'm going to pick Yair. Early prediction. Again, when we get closer to the fight, I'll do a full breakdown. Jeff Neal versus Prates. I'm on the Prates train, so I'll pick Prates to beat Jeff Neal, but Jeff Neal's kind of a sleeper a bit. I think Jeff Neal is very underrated, and sometimes he puts on lackluster performances, but I think he could win, but I'm going to pick Prates. I just think he's slicker on the feet. Let's move ahead to UFC 315. This goes down on May 10th. We have Belal Muhammad versus Della Maddalena for the welterweight title. What do I say about this? I'm reacting to all this in real time. I haven't really put a lot of thought into this. Like I'm giving you my almost live reaction to the fights. I'm going to be honest. I think a lot of people, there's a bit of like a Jack Della Maddalena fan base that'll probably get behind him because they don't like Belal. And, I have no problem with if you like JDM or whatnot. But to me, and this has nothing to do with bias, you can say, oh, well, I was rooting for Belal. I can root for a fighter, but also look at a fight objectively. And when I heard this fight announced, I said, this is an easy win for Belal. I think that's a very, very easy win for Belal Muhammad. I think that's an easy first title defense. Now, JDM does have the ability to KO Belal. JDM has the ability to KO anyone in the division. But at the end of the day, he arguably lost to Belal Hafez, who's basically washed out the UFC at this point. I'm not even sure JDM was going to beat Leon Edwards, and Belal dominated him. So basically, JDM's going to have a puncher's chance. Now, don't get me wrong. Every round starts on the feet. Belal doesn't have great finishing ability. So it's like JDM at the start of every round, there'll be high tension. But also it's like, what's going on with Shavkat? Did Gary really whoop him that bad in December that he can't fight 6 months later? I know there was some talk about his knee and whatnot. And I guess I just realized Gary posted that thing about the oblique kick. I guess maybe that was the injury that caused Shavkat to be out of this fight. But it's just like, I was really looking forward to Belal Shavkat in December. It got canceled there. Was really assuming that it was going to happen later this year at 315. Somehow got canceled or never made because Shavkat's injured. But apparently Shavkat will fight the winner of this fight. So Belal, JDM winner, will fight Shavkat. That's according to Dana White. You never know what's bound to happen in the division between now and then. But initial reaction to this matchup, Belal's going to dominate JDM. By the way, Belal tweeted this out, in case you guys are wondering. Dang, I stole Leon's belt and his opponent. I just like seeing Belal just shit on dudes, okay? And I don't know why here I have Belal's record open, but look at this resume. Leon Edwards, Gilbert Burns, Sean Brady, Vicente Luque when he was actually decent, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Damian Maia. I mean, great resume. He adds JDM to it. I think it's decent. It's a young, up-and-coming contender. I'm not going to sit here and say, it's kind of undeserved. I got to be honest. Like, you're getting a title shot off of beating Gilbert Burns, over a year ago. And, he was losing the majority of the fight and came back and won in the third round, which fair enough. But, what's Gilbert Burns now on, a 3-fight losing streak? Lost to Belal. I got to open this. I got a refresher right now. I think he's on a 3-fight losing streak, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, lost to Belal, lost to Jack Della, lost to Sean Brady. But I guess they're not going to do the Sean Brady rematch for UFC 315. So I think it's a mildly interesting fight. I think as we get closer, I'll get more excited for it. But I really wanted Belal Shavkat. It's a fight that I've been kind of fantasizing about for a while. We kind of had that number one contender fight between Gary and Shavkat. Shavkat eked it out just barely got by Ian Machado Gary. And I kind of wanted to see it, man. I really, I didn't kind of want to see it. I really wanted to see Belal versus Shavkat. Now it's not happening, and now it's probably never going to happen. Because Belal is going to beat JDM. Somebody else is going to emerge. Then all of a sudden, we'll be giving Michael Morales a title shot if he beats Gilbert Burns as well. So, but either way, my initial reaction is Belal dominates JDM. JDM, you look at his last few fights, getting taken down and controlled by Gilbert Burns. That's not a horrible look. I know he came back. Kevin Holland fight was a split decision. I think Kevin Holland's a complete and utter scrub. I thought he arguably lost to Belal Hafez. Now, he did take that on short notice. So his last impressive win, and I get coming from behind against Gilbert Burns is impressive, but it's Randy Brown. Randy Brown's a decent fight, but yeah, I'm not in love with this UFC 315 main event. I think it's an interesting stylistic clash just because Belal doesn't have great finishing ability. But Belal has unlimited cardio. His boxing is improving. He doesn't get the respect he deserves on the feet. You know, he's basically Canelo Alvarez on the feet. He has that type of boxing. I'm kidding, obviously, but you get my point. And the wrestling is going to be too much, man. It's going to be too much for JDM. JDM has to get a finish in the first 2 rounds. Otherwise, I think he really gets dominated. I think he's going to get smoked. And not really smoked, but you know what I mean. I just think he's going to lose every single round. Maybe he could hurt Belal in the first and Belal would recover, but it's like, when is Belal? Belal hasn't been cracked in forever. JDM could be the guy to do it with his excellent boxing. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, yeah, man, I think JDM's got this one, bro. But I think it's going to be clouded by bias against Belal Muhammad, to be honest, for whatever reason, okay? I just think people like JDM because they think he's exciting, which he is exciting. They're going to hope that he beats Belal, kind of to some people, and I don't understand why, unlikable champion. And people are going to kind of hype this up like, yeah, man, banger. JDM kind of doesn't deserve it. I don't hate it. Would have rather Shavkat, but if he's injured. But I just don't get, it's February. How can he not fight in May and he last fought in December? So it must be a serious injury. I don't know when he's returning. I guess the end of the year. Seems like Shavkat's super injury prone. But again, I'm going Belal Muhammad over JDM. I think he outgrapples him for 5 rounds and probably wins a decision. Now, also on 315, co-main event, Valentina Shevchenko versus Manon Fiorot. I'm not going to spend too much time on this fight because I know a lot of people don't really care about this fight that much. I think it's the right fight to make right now. And I'll tell you this right now, all that back and forth with Grasso, Shevchenko, Grasso, Shevchenko, Grasso, Shevchenko, Grasso. I think it was all for nothing. Shevchenko finally got her belt back. She's going to lose to Manon Fiorot. Shevchenko, she doesn't drink water during training. She has those crusty-ass lips. She's regressing. She's kind of really, if anything, just kind of, even if she hasn't regressed, she's really just kind of stayed kind of the same plateaued. Manon Fiorot, excellent striking, really good grappling, strong, good in the clinch. Younger. I don't even know what the age discrepancy here is. Let me take a look. Actually, it's not even that crazy. But Manon Fiorot is 35 years old, but also in MMA, she's much younger. 12-1, only 13 fights compared to 29 fights for Valentina Shevchenko. So I'm taking Manon Fiorot on that one. I think it's a relatively easy win for Manon Fiorot. I think she probably wins the decision. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is Ilia Topuria and his tensions with the UFC. And also what's next for Ilia Topuria, because Ariel Helwani is reporting about what's next for Ilia Topuria now that Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes is for the undisputed title. Now, Dana White said Ilia Topuria feels like he did everything he could do at featherweight, but he also couldn't make weight. I'm going to translate that for you. Topuria's obviously been open publicly, as well as his coaches, saying that he didn't want to fight at featherweight anymore, that he wanted to move up to lightweight. He's been saying that for literal months. Coach came out like a month and a half ago and said, look, Topuria wants to go to 155. I think the UFC said to Topuria, look, we need a main event for UFC 314. Let's give Volkanovski the rematch. You beat Volkanovski, you can go up to 155, and you can fight for double champ status, because they weren't going to be willing to give Movsar Evloev a title shot, which, by the way, I know it's, people aren't, it's not going to be super popular. I really wanted Ilia Topuria, Movsar Evloev for the featherweight title, undefeated versus undefeated. It was supposed to happen back at UFC 270 when both the guys were up-and-coming contenders, so that's never going to happen. But I believe they wanted him to fight Volk. I think he said, no, I don't want to fight Volk, because essentially, how is he going to beat Volk even more impressively than he did the first time? And then on top of that, it doesn't really do much for Topuria's legacy. And he's like, no, I don't really want to feel like fighting Volk. I want to fight at 155. I want bigger fights at 155. I don't want to have to cut weight. I've made myself into this superstar. I beat Volk. I beat Holloway in impressive fashion. Let me go up to 55. I don't have to cut weight anymore. And the UFC said, okay, if you're not going to fight Volk, then we're going to make this for the undisputed title, and you could drop your belt. Topuria agreed to it. Now, even though I think the UFC is a little bit annoyed with Topuria, and I do believe there's negotiations going on, I do believe, and if you've been watching my videos, you know I literally broke this down like weeks ago before it was even rumored. Now, Ariel Helwani is tweeting this out. The plan is for Ilia Topuria to fight Islam Makhachev later this year, I'm told, perhaps as soon as International Fight Week. Lots to digest and dissect. We'll upload a quick react video to the channel shortly. I literally did a video 2-3 weeks ago saying they were trying to make Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria, and that Volkanovski versus Lopes would be main event of UFC 314 for the interim featherweight title. Now it's for the undisputed. I just think Topuria was kind of frustrating him a little bit. Also, maybe they didn't want to do an interim belt. They wanted it to be an undisputed belt. It didn't matter that much for Topuria to be a simultaneous double champ. And every time we have a simultaneous double champ, it ends up kind of backing up the division and backing up divisions and making them kind of convoluted. So I think that's why the undisputed title is on the line for Volkanovski Lopes. Plus, Volkanovski's a company guy. They want to put it on the line for him. But I do believe they're going to make Makhachev versus Topuria for the lightweight title. The question is, when does Islam return? Because if Islam wants to return this summer, then it has to be Islam versus Topuria for the lightweight title. Now, if for some reason Islam is going to be out till later this year, or he wants to fight in the fall, or whatever it may be, Topuria has been interested in fighting Oliveira. There's the Dustin Poirier fight that could be available. By the way, Max Holloway kind of got screwed. He left featherweight, or supposedly is leaving featherweight, to go to lightweight to get away from Topuria, who just knocked him out and embarrassed him. And now Topuria followed him. So if I was Max, I'm going right back down to featherweight. I'm winning a fight. You could literally sell a fourth fight with Volkanovski, as well as a fight with Diego Lopes, especially considering the UFC doesn't really like Movsar Evloev. So I know that we're going off on a side tangent there, but I think the UFC right now, the reason this is coming down to the wire, and we don't really need to have this up on the screen anymore, and this is a really long video for like a return video here, but I think the reason this is all kind of seems last minute and it's taken forever and there's been some speculation is the UFC is still negotiating with Islam as well as Topuria. Topuria, I don't know when's the last time he signed a contract. There were some mega rumors, some credible rumors that when he fought out his deal, the UFC signed him as one of the highest paid non-title holders in the UFC, and allegedly he was going to go to PFL for a little bit. I think this was before he even beat Josh Emmett. Essentially, he did the Francis Ngannou, but he got paid by the UFC, is kind of the speculation or the rumors, credible rumors out there. And I think Topuria is very, very smart. He's obviously shown that. I think not only is he telling the UFC, look, I want to go up and fight Islam. I'll be willing to fight a contender if I have to, but I want to make the big bucks. I have proven myself as somebody who has an aesthetically pleasing fight style. I'm the elite of the elite. And he has that it factor where Topuria is really on the verge of being a mega star in the UFC. He already has some star power. There's no doubt about that. I mean, back-to-back wins, KO wins against Volkanovski and Holloway, especially Holloway coming off that UFC 300 KO over Gaethje. So I think Topuria is one piece of it. And I think they were trying to get it figured out, and they would have liked to announce Topuria versus Islam all in this one major announcement. But also I think Islam is negotiating with the UFC, and it's all kind of happening subtly publicly as well. Because if you've heard Islam, he's coming out and saying, yeah, I don't really want to fight 145ers anymore because I didn't get any credit. Like the UFC hyped up Islam versus Volkanovski, battle for pound. And then Islam wins. All the fans give him no credit. And Dana White's like, John Jones, any educated adult knows John Jones is pound for pound number one. So Islam, being the pound for pound number one fighter in the world, being potentially the GOAT lightweight of all time, which GOAT is what that means. I don't know why I said that like that. And also now you're asking me to fight another 145er. It's just like, what Josh Thompson said. You said when Hamzat beat Whitaker. Well, Whitaker's really a 170er, which dumbest take I've ever heard. If Islam beats Topuria, I think some people will discredit that win. But ultimately, Islam's very smart as well. Topuria is very smart. Islam's very smart. They're both elite level fighters. They're both champions, even though technically Topuria, as soon as 314 happens, Topuria will have vacated. He hasn't officially vacated yet because they don't want to not have a champion. But the second the bell rings for Volkanovski versus Lopes, Topuria will have now vacated and the undisputed titles on the line. But the UFC is dealing with both these guys. They're going to have to come to an agreement, and they're going to then be able to make the fight and announce it whether it be International Fight Week in late June, early July, potentially it could be in August. Maybe if they do Jones-Aspinall, that could be International Fight Week. But I don't really buy this whole act that Topuria can't make weight. I don't think he wants to make weight anymore. I think he has the 2 biggest wins he can get from featherweight. He feels confident going up to lightweight. He thinks he can make more money going up to lightweight. He thinks he has legacy to earn by potentially knocking out Islam Makhachev. Imagine he knocks out Islam Makhachev. That'd be insanity. But I think the UFC is negotiating with Topuria right now. I think they're negotiating with Islam Makhachev. And I think eventually that fight will be made, which I called it. I told you guys Chandler versus Paddy was going to happen. And I told you Islam versus Topuria was going to happen. Now, there's a chance it could still not happen. We'll have to see. I do believe Ariel's right. But once Ariel tweets that out, Dana White may change his mind. So also depending on when Islam wants to return, and also depending on how pissed Dana is at Topuria, which Dana tends to get over that more the more money signs he sees, which that's a mega fight, so maybe he'll be over it. They may book Topuria versus like a Dustin Poirier or a Charles Oliveira. I would lean towards a Charles Oliveira. Topuria doesn't fight Islam next, he'll fight Charles Oliveira. Because Oliveira has some star power as well. And if Oliveira beats Topuria, they'll just book Islam versus Oliveira too, which isn't the greatest, but Oliveira coming off a win over Topuria would be crazy. And also Topuria coming off a win at lightweight against Oliveira. He has earned his shot. He's proven that he's a lightweight. And also, you know, now who else is going to fight Islam Makhachev at that point? They're not giving it to Arman, so it would make perfect sense. So there's my reaction to all the fights. Early pick for Islam Topuria, I lean Islam. I can't forget the end of the first round, Topuria, Bryce Mitchell. I think Islam will be able to control him on the ground. I do know Topuria is an amazing grappler. I'd have to see him at lightweight first. Could change my pick. I do think Topuria has the striking advantage. The boxing is nasty. He has really good power. Islam sometimes when he gets into a little bit of a more wild exchange, he does kind of leave his chin out there. You know, who did Brendan Schaub said knocked out Islam? Pantoja knocked him out before. That's what Brendan Schaub said. But yeah, that's my thoughts on all the fights. UFC 314, UFC 315. 314 stacked. Fights could have been a little bit better. 315, don't hate it, don't love it. Wish it was Shavkat versus Belal, but it is what it is. I understand the UFC, I guess, did the best they could with Shavkat being injured and not able to fight at UFC 315. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate everyone's support recently. I'll see you guys in the next video.